name is Fox, and I'm going to be showing you all how to use Photoshop to brighten up an image. I'm going to teach you all a few different ways to do it, so let's get right into it. Now, the first thing you want to do is get your layer here, the background layer, and you're going to click that lock button so you can unlock the layer and then make some changes. So our new layer is just called layer 0. That's our original layer, and what we want to do is to duplicate the layer. Now all you have to do for that is click that light, make sure it's selected, it's that light gray, click that layer and hit Control C, Control V, or Command C, Command V if that is on a Mac. So here we have our layer 0 and our layer 1. And the reason that we do this is because we want to make sure that, worst comes to worst, we decide to scrap all of the edits we made, we can just go back to our layer 0, which is going to remain completely intact. So this avoids us having to undo every single edit we've made. So over here, what we're going to do is that we're going to look over at the top of our adjustments tab. If anything looks different to what's on your screen, that's totally normal. I've made changes to my my Photoshop default. So, for example, all of these settings on the left side, I reordered them, changed them a little to look more like something that I would use. So if things do look different, don't be alarmed. You do have the same capabilities. All you have to do is find those on your screen. So anyways, back to the adjustments panel. What we're going to do is that we're going to look over at our adjustment presets, and this is basically the one-click easy changes that we can make to our image. So adjustment presets gives us a lot of different options, and these are basically filters that Photoshop has provided for us. This is just in your app, no changes needed. So over under portraits, we have sunshine, we have darker, we have brighter, we have warmth, moody, and classic black and white. And there are a bunch of different options down here. I believe photo repair also has an option called Lighten. So these, when you hover your mouse over it, will give you the different options you have without having to actually commit. But let's say you do want to click Portraits Brighter, you click it, and it applies the filter to your picture. I'm going to hit Control Z to undo that because I don't really like to use adjustment presets just because I like to have more control over my image. So instead, we're going to go back and I'm going to show you guys 3 different adjustments that you can use to brighten up your image. And those are going to be brightness, contrast, curves, and levels. So first, let's go with the simplest. We have brightness contrast, and brightness contrast gives us the way of brightening up every single pixel in the image by the same amount, basically. So if we raise the brightness, notice how every single part of the image brightens up, versus if we put it down, every single part of the image lowers in brightness. So let's say I want to bring it up a little bit over to here, and our contrast, what it does, see if we raise the contrast, see how we have these really big differences between the brighter parts of the image and the darker parts. But if we lower the contrast, the brighter parts don't really stand out as much because our darker parts are not that strong. So that's what contrast does. Generally, when I brighten up an image, I do want to lower the contrast, but it really just depends on what image I'm using. So that's how the brightness and contrast adjustment works. Another option you have, single click, hitting that auto button, and it just decides what it's going to do. This is based off of Photoshop's assessment of the image and its pixels and its colors. So you can always play around with this to figure out what it is you want to do with the image. So that is your brightness and contrast adjustment. So let me delete that. All I do is click backspace, and I deleted that layer. So now let's take a look at curves. Under curves, you have this graph. It looks a little scary, but it's okay. I'm going to explain how it works. So up here at the right side, at the higher side, we have our highlights. And in the middle part, we have our midtones. And in our lower part, left part, we have our shadows. So what happens with curves is that quite literally it works like a curve. Every time you have an image, it's going to start out like a straight line, but when you select a part, let's say we're at our highlights, we raise our highlights, everything is going to kind of raise, but just at different rates. So while our shadows do raise a little bit, and our midtones raise a little bit too, our highlights have also risen quite a lot. And this just helps keep better balance of an image. Now let's say, we can also make a second dot to change things around. We can lower our midtones as well. And notice how when we lower our midtones, or keep it the same really, and raise our highlights, the curve kind of goes in the opposite direction. Let me see if I can make that a little bit more clear. Notice that the highlights curves upwards and around the shadows curves downwards. And so that's how curves works. Generally speaking, having less curves going on is probably going to make things way easier. So for example, if I bring my shadows to about the same, the rest of the image is kind of going to look a little funky, right? So playing around with these curves helps you control better what happens in the image. So back to what I originally wanted to do. We increase the highlights, we increase the midtones just a little bit, and our shadows a little bit less. So say I wanted to bring up my shadows a bit more though, and my midtones a bit more, and my highlights a bit more. We see minor changes in the image, and what curves does is really help us control what's going on in the image. If you really only want to focus on your highlights, you can get rid of these curves here and just bring up your highlights. But of course, not really what I want to do in this image. I want to bring up pretty much everything in the image, just by different amounts. So that's how you use curves. Of course, you can always click that auto and it'll do it for you. So I'm going to select that layer and delete it, hitting backspace once again, so that I can show you how to use levels. Now, levels has two main things you're going to want to understand and use. Up here we have a histogram, and what happens with this histogram is that, let's say you click that darker triangle at the bottom, you slide it to the right. What this does is increase the intensity of the blacks in your image. Remember that every color has whites or blacks and other colors involved in it. It's not just the color that you see. So yeah, that black is going to increase all of the blacks in your image. Notice that even the lighter colors dim out when you move that to the right. With your highlights, this triangle on the right, the white one, similar thing except moving it to the left is going to brighten up your highlights, as well as brightening up pretty much all the other colors. But the darker colors don't brighten up as much. And with this midtones, left makes it brighter, right makes it darker. It changes things in different quantities, so that might be more beneficial for you. So over here in the bottom slider is our second option. We have the range of colors or brightness from the darkest blacks in the image to the brightest whites in the image. Now, what you can do here is that you can decide the range of your colors. So for example, if we move our black slider to the right, we're going to basically change how different the brightest whites of the image are versus the blacks in the image. So notice how our blacks become more of a dark gray onto a lighter gray, or if we move it all the way, it'll become totally white. So I don't really want to change how dark the blacks are, but rather bring out the non-blacks a bit more. Over here at levels, we can lower the intensity of the whites until it becomes totally black. So these two are not really things I want to change. I don't want to make the whites darker and the blacks lighter. I actually want to change the midtones of the image, and similar to how I did the curves, our midtones are going to increase. Maybe I want to make my whites a little brighter as well, and that's how you use levels. Now I'm going to keep that levels. Oh, by the way, we also have that auto feature in case that kind of stuff, changing the image a lot, scares you. You always have the auto feature. Now let's say I keep this general brightness of the image, but I notice, hey, I don't think the yellows really pop out enough because we added in more white to the yellows. So I'm going to close this tab really quick, and I'm going to go over to selective color. Now, I think generally it's going to be preset to reds, but I'm going to change it to yellows with that drop down. And what it does is that it only changes the yellow parts of the image. So if we get our black, we take it to the right, we're increasing the blacks in the yellows. But notice how nothing else is really changing except for the yellows in our image. Now notice that some colors that may not look yellow are still going to be interpreted as yellow. For example, some of these whites over here really have a hint of yellow in them, so those will also be changed. So I don't want to really mess around too much with that, because notice we lower that and these whites become very popping out, very white. To the right, we lower the intensity of those yellows here. So, or sorry, not the intensity, the lightness. So over here with our yellows, what we can do is we can increase the amount of yellow that's in our yellow parts of the image, or we can lower it up until there. Now, I want to bring out the yellows, so I can increase my yellows all the way. But what I can also do to make it even more yellow is get this magenta slider all the way down and that cyan slider all the way down. And we have really very pure yellow, but let's say, you don't really want a pure yellow, you want to make it a little bit more warm. The magenta slider can help you with that. Or if you know, you want to make yellow flowers seem like lime green, you can make them more green with the cyan. Now, generally when using the selective color, a lot of it is about balancing. So you do want to figure out, you know, yeah, I do want more yellow, but do I really want to make it so yellow that it looks a little bit unnatural? Maybe you can add some magenta in it, or if you really want to go crazy with it, you increase that cyan, or you can increase both. It really depends on your taste for the image. Of course, I don't really want to have much green in there because I already have a lot of green with the leaves around. Now let's say, you know, I go over to the greens and I want to make them a little bit pop out, you know. We've got cyan, yellow, and we can decrease the magenta. Another thing that we can do here is change our whites, neutrals, and blacks. So if we go to neutrals, we can change all of the mid-tone colors around the image. So I can make everything more yellow or less yellow. And I can make everything more magenta or less magenta. I typically use these for more creative shots that aren't really trying to mimic reality, but rather set a mood. And we can also make everything more black, which looks a little weird, or white, which also looks a little weird. But if you move everything in moderation and keeping the integrity of the photo, you can expect it to still look good. So remember that, you know, we take out selective color, add it in again. You can see the difference that it makes. It really allows the colors to pop out without, you know, keeping it at the same brightness. If we turn off the levels here, look at how dark that is, and look at the levels on. Really, a lot of this is about balancing what you have and making sure that whatever downside you have with the levels, which was really washing out the colors, you can counteract it by messing around with your selective color. Thank you for watching, and I hope you all have a nice day.